Let me welcome you all on behalf of JEDI, the Journal Editors Discussion Interface, and the Center for Open Science to this webinar on the relationship between journal editors and journal publishers. We are very fortunate to have an esteemed panel to help us sort through this. I'll introduce them in a little bit more detail before they speak. But we have Moin Sayed, Anna Stills, Johan Rorik, and John Gerstel here. So thank you very much for joining us. I have also Amanda from COS and Priya from JEDI here, kind of helping me keep things smooth in the background. My name is Sebastian Karcher, and I'm the director of JEDI and of the Qualitative Data Repository at Syracuse University. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. The relationship between journal editors and journal publishers is kind of curious, right? So journals are edited by researchers typically, sometimes for small honorarium, sometimes on an entirely voluntary basis. And then they're published by publishers, some of whom are nonprofits, some of whom are profits, some of whom are very large, some of whom are quite small. And then sometimes there is a third party involved. Just a number of journals are published on behalf of academic associations. John is here as a representative of one of those. And again, there is a lot of variation there. Sometimes the journal is owned by the association. Sometimes the journal is actually still owned by the publishers. So lots of complication. In an ideal world, all of this would go smoothly. Everyone would be working happily and jointly together for the production and dissemination of knowledge. And sometimes that's the case. And sometimes there are frictions. And we try to assemble a panel that highlights both the tensions, but also some of the things that sometimes go well, to have an interesting discussion about these important topics in knowledge production. Some organizational things. We are recording this webinar. COS publishes all the webinars online, so that other people who weren't able to make it can learn from this. We do have the Q&A open. Please feel free to use this throughout, generally for questions that you would like answers from one or more of the panelists. The Q&A works better than the chat because it's easier to sort and keep track of. We have about 100 people in attendance, so if you do feel you would benefit greatly from being able to speak up and voice your comment or question, we are able to do that. Just raise your hand once we get to the Q&A portion of this, which will be after the panelists speak. All right. I will, from now on, mainly be in charge of navigating traffic and keeping time. And our first speaker, I've asked speakers to start with kind of a 7 to 10 minute statement, is Moin Sayed. He's the McKnight Presidential Endowed Professor of Psychology at the University of Minnesota. He's a cultural and developmental psychologist whose research currently focuses on meta-science and scientific reform, and he has held multiple editorial roles since 2012, including as editor-in-chief at Emerging Adulthood, which is published by Sage, and Infant and Child Development, published by Wiley. Take it away, Moin.
Great. Thanks, Sebastian. Thanks to the other panelists, and thanks for so many people who have attended today. This is great. Sebastian gave the introduction. My background is in psychology. I span a number of different subdisciplines in psychology and also work in the area of meta-science. I have served as an editor-in-chief of 2 journals, one for Sage and one for Wiley. The one for Wiley, I was actually explicitly recruited because of my advocacy in open science and diversity issues. So that's something that we could discuss if people are interested in that dynamic. I've also edited a number of special issues for different publishers. I've consulted pretty extensively with publishers and journals and editors and publications committees on reform issues with respect to both open science and diversifying. Those are sort of the twin domains of advocacy that I engage in, both in terms of research, original research, and also in terms of the publishing process. I'm also one of the founders of Peer Community in Psychology, which exists but is not yet fully available yet, should be launched very soon. And so if people are interested in discussing the peer community in model, I can talk a little bit about that. I've also been involved in peer community in registered reports since it launched 3 years ago or so. So my comments that I'm providing today are really coming from the perspective of someone who's worked with for-profit publishers as an editor-in-chief who's committed to editorial reform. So really some of my efforts are trying to subvert the current system and generate new models, but then also trying to work within the current system to make some incremental or sometimes more substantial changes to how we're doing things. And so I just have a bunch of scattered comments. I figured I'd just say a bunch of stuff and then we'll see kind of what sticks and what people want to hear more about. I want to say up front that I am certainly no big fan of for-profit publishers. And so none of my comments should be taken to be as a defense in any way of the publishing model or their behavior. I think there's a lot of problems. I think the industry is really bad. There are a lot of things that we can quickly and easily point to about the maladaptive kind of aspects of the practice. That said, many of the people who are working for publishers are good. They're good people, right? So I'm not trying to demonize the individuals who are working because I think a lot of them have very good intentions, even though the overall system really has a lot of problems. And I think you see this, and you can think about publishers in two broad ways in this context. One is that they are interested in staying abreast with current scientific practices and really listening to the community. I believe that they really are. They want to know what's going on. They're interested in what the cutting edge views and practices and methods and everything are. And they're very much committed to that. But that is also balanced with their interest. That interest is motivated, at least in part and sometimes in full, by the desire for profit and for market share. Right. So the motivation is not often scientific. It's often because of trying to improve their market visibility, right? Things like that. I think this is all very well known to most people who are here, I imagine. So they're generally very supportive of perceived innovations, but often not interested in putting a lot of investment in those innovations, particularly in the form of money. So I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. So what happens then is it results in some what I would say is good practices that are nevertheless constrained. So a lot of publishers these days have what are sometimes referred to as transfer networks or referral networks. So if your article is rejected from one journal, they'll suggest that it could be transferred to one of their other journals that they also publish. And in general, I think that's a solid practice, and we should be doing more of that across the sciences in our publishing, because what happens in that context is that your paper is rejected, but the reviews are transferred to the new journal. So it really does save author time, it saves reviewer time, and so on. But it's also often the case that publishers are doing that to divert articles from, for example, an not open access journal, but like a green open access journal to perhaps a gold open access, right? One where or the expectation is that an APC an article processing charge, is being assessed. But it's also a way for them to maintain control over those articles. So if they're referring to them within their publishing ecosystem, then within Wiley, for example, then you're not submitting it to a Sage journal, right? So it's all about sort of maintaining control over these articles. And I think that's a bad thing, right? We should be able to have sort of trans-publisher transfers available. It's also the case, and I saw this quite a bit in my work as an editor, that just really low quality articles get bounced around. And I know this is not popular to say among some people, for some people, but some articles just should never be published. Not only should they not be rejected, or should they be rejected from this journal, they should be rejected from all journals. And this is absolutely the case. It's just really low quality work, but this system kind of bounces them around and tries to find a home for them because that is perceived as useful for their bottom line. Another example is support for registered reports. I found that publishers are generally supportive of the format of registered reports, but the editorial systems, the editorial management systems that we have are not well suited for that two-tiered publishing system and or two-tiered review system, sorry. And those systems are so clunky, despite all the money that the publishers have and that they make from publishing our articles. They don't really invest a lot in the editorial management systems. They get incrementally better, but they're not looking to change those systems to accommodate changes in our publishing style. And so that's been a problem for advancing registered reports. Some publishers have made some changes, so I'm not totally dismissing everyone. The other is preprint support. Maybe some publishers are still trying to do this, but I know several years ago they were trying to maintain their own preprint servers. That didn't seem to go very well. I think most authors weren't particularly interested in using publisher-specific preprint servers. And publishers are generally supportive of preprints, unless it's convenient for them to not be, right? And sometimes under some situations, they'll decide that a preprint is actually a published work. And this is something that's actually come up in the context of the peer community in model at times, that model is seen as a threat to the publisher's work. And so they can kind of construe how they see preprints differently depending on their motivations. Finally, I'll say just a couple things about just the institutions of for-profit publishers. They're large organizations. There's many, many hands involved, and it's very hierarchical. And so sometimes part of my biggest frustration in working with them beyond their motivations is how internally inconsistent a lot of their statements and claims can be. So you can have somebody that you're working with more directly, sort of everyday contact person is very supportive. They care about the issues that you care about, but some higher ups have different priorities and send different messages. And so you get very kind of confused communications about some policies and practices, what's allowable, what's not allowable, et cetera. And I've also found, again, that they're generally supportive of a lot of innovations, as I said, but not willing to put in the necessary resources, especially financial resources. This has come up a lot. I know I've heard from many others too, like trying to get data editors. I know some people probably in the audience here are data editors, people who can review the quality of the open data, maybe can do reproducibility checks. It's very difficult to get publishers to allocate the funds to actually pay someone to do that. And that's the kind of thing that should be a paid position. And then finally, I already said finally, but this is truly my finally. There are some interesting dynamics here, and John certainly has a lot of insight on this, but the considerations are different when you're working with a publisher for a standalone journal. So the journal just exists with the publisher, and with it when it's a society journal. And society journals have publication committees, and publications committees themselves have vested interests that include sometimes revenues, sharing some of the costs. And so that can be an additional barrier that sometimes we don't talk a lot about. We are quick to demonize the publishers, and I've been doing that through most of my remarks. But publication committees can also be rather conservative organizations and resistant to change, and can be a barrier roadblock to implementing reforms that are otherwise quite sensible. So that's kind of been some of my experience. And we can certainly talk more about that if that issue is of interest to folks. But yeah, that's sort of my opening stuff I want to throw out there. Hopefully something in there is of interest to somebody, and you'll ask some questions and we can talk about some of that more. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Moin, for this great kind of summary of all sorts of issues and contentions, and for staying right in time. And without further ado, we're going to move on to Anna. Anna Stilts is Kernan Robson Professor of Political Science at UC Berkeley. She's the founding editor-in-chief of Free and Equal, a journal of ethics and public affairs. And until May last year, She was editor-in-chief of Philosophy and Public Affairs and resigned together with the entire editorial team, if I'm not mistaken, in reaction to publisher policies. Anna?
Great. Thanks so much for inviting me. It's great to be here. So I guess I'm going to speak a bit about my experience as editor-in-chief of Philosophy and Public Affairs, which is a Wiley owned and Wiley published journal, and I was editor-in-chief until May last year. And then I now am editor-in-chief of a new journal, Free and Equal, which is published by the Open Library of the Humanities. We just published our first 2 pieces on the website. We've been around for a few months. So I have those experiences to share. And then I was also member of the editorial board of a different journal called the Journal of Political Philosophy, which went through a very similar transition from Wiley to Open Library of the Humanities. So I also know a bit about their experience, and I may reference that too. I should say that my field, I'm a political theorist in a political science department. The kind of work I do overlaps somewhat with work that people do in law schools and philosophy departments. And the journal I edit is focused on political philosophy. It's a small field. Until 2023, there were kind of 3 top field journals that were long established and very well recognized in this field. One was the Journal of Political Philosophy, a Wiley-owned journal. One was Philosophy and Public Affairs, a Wiley-owned journal. And the other one is Ethics, which is published by the University of Chicago Press. So as editor of Philosophy and Public Affairs, my former journal had really long-standing problems with Wiley that actually go back to the prior editor's term. So in 2019, we experienced a crisis with Wiley under the previous editor, where they initiated a disciplinary review process of that person. And as a condition of improving the journal's performance to Wiley's satisfaction, they demanded that we accept 35 articles within the next 60 days. Now, historically, my journal had published about 16 articles a year. So, this was over 10 times the average. This was basically, they were demanding an absolute transformation of the journal. We were in crisis about this. We retained legal counsel. My previous editor was facing some serious health problems during this time and decided to step down. And the body of associate editors of the journal nominated me to succeed her. And Wiley refused to confirm me as editor for 8 months while they negotiated with me and pressured me to accede to this new publication schedule, to significant growth targets in the number of articles that we publish. And finally, we threatened to file suit against them in New Jersey court. And they, after an 8-month standoff, during which we had multiple meetings with them, multiple lawyers, letters back and forth, they finally did back down and confirmed me as editor in 2020. And I became editor and worked at Wiley for 4 years. So after that standoff, relations did improve a little bit. We had a better manager. We were transferred to a different team. In 2024, our kind of reasonable manager was removed, and we were given a new manager team who started to pressure us again about targets. They also, were demanding that we implement a lot of changes at the journal, like that we standardize the look of the journal. We had to participate in one of these article transfer networks, and with our reviewer names and reports attached. Now, we're a really small field, and a lot of the people who are associate editors and editors at other journals submitted work to Philosophy and Public Affairs, and we had to basically send them the names of the reviewers on the papers. And we felt uncomfortable with that. We felt that could compromise the anonymity of our process. That was just, those objections absolutely steamrolled. They told us they were going to phase out PDF publication. In philosophy, it's technical material often. People tend to want to print it out, not read it on a web screen. They wouldn't provide me any data on, the statistics for PDF downloads for our journal. They would only provide me data on the entire network of Wiley-owned journals and how many Wiley-owned journals, how much articles were read on the web versus PDF. So they weren't willing to listen to like our needs in any serious way. And these were kind of demands that were issued in a top-down format, as these are fiats we were just going to have to accommodate. So we were starting to get pretty like upset again. And then right in the middle of that, our sister journal, right? I remember I said there were three main journals, two owned by Wiley. Our sister journal, I was on the editorial board. In December 2023, they informed the editor of the journal, who had been editor for 30 years, who had built the journal from scratch, that he was terminated with no reason or justification offered for the termination. He was, in his late 60s. He had been thinking about retiring, and he had some younger co-editors. So initially he, said, okay, why don't negotiate with the co-editors to take over? And Wiley, again, brought quantitative targets to the table, increasing the number of articles the Journal of Political Philosophy published by 40%, an action plan if the younger co-editors would fail to meet those targets. So the co-editors felt like they couldn't continue to edit the journal on those terms, and the negotiations with Wiley broke down. The fact that Robert Gooden, the editor, had been fired summarily in this fashion became public. And over 1,000 people in my discipline signed a boycott pledge to decline any invitation to join the editorial board of the Journal of Political Philosophy, to refuse to review for them, to refuse to submit papers. And that journal is basically a zombie journal now. It's not publishing. So this happened in 2023, and we were transferred to the same team that fired Gooden. I had a few meetings with these people, and they were, they were very tense, difficult meetings. And so my journal, Philosophy and Public Affairs, we decided we just didn't see a good future with Wiley. This had been going on since 2019. Things were not getting better. They just absolutely destroyed our sister journal. We just can't work with them anymore. So in May 2024, we all resigned. And we went to OLH, and we have founded a new journal. Wiley owned the name of our old journal. They owned the back catalog, so we couldn't, we offered to buy it from them, but they weren't willing to negotiate. So we founded a new journal. The new journal is doing great. We got 151 submissions in 3.5 months. In 2024, we just published our first 2 papers. I've got our third coming right along, hopefully next week. And OLH, it has been very flexible and sort of good to work with. We have a triple anonymous review model, which means I don't know the authors' names when I'm handling the papers. They were willing to customize their platform to try to accommodate that for us, which was terrific. They've been very responsive to our needs and requests. They built us a custom website, which is great. So we're happy to be in this new home. There are some issues, that if there are people out there who are thinking about doing this, I'm happy to chat with you or to email with you. Johan nicely emailed with me a while back to give me some help too. But there are some things that are different in this new ecosystem of online open access publishing. So one thing is, we do have a managing editor. So OLH covers many of our costs. They cover typesetting, the website. They provide us an editorial management software system. But we do have a managing editor, and we do pay for copy editing. So there's some additional costs that we have. And I've had to engage in fundraising to try to cover those costs. We've got a kind of consortium of university ethics centers who've pledged to give us some support, but that is part of my job now. That wasn't part of my job before, when I worked for Wiley. On the other hand, I'm not having any conversations issuing me demands to publish 35 articles in 60 days. And so, the basic underlying problem, I think, is that the business model of these commercial publishers is changing. They now make money from these article processing fees that are, tremendous. And they have every incentive to place pressure on editors to maximize the number of articles the journal publishes and to rush them to publication as quickly as possible. Wiley's copy editing process was horrible. Like I was getting complaint letters from authors when I first took over, and I finally negotiated a system where I paid out of my honorarium to copy edit the articles, so their systems wouldn't touch it. Um, they're just not interested in quality control in any way. Uh, so their business model, I think, is just kind of opposed to the values of academic integrity, academic independence that I think should be part of the editorial process. And this is a kind of systemic conflict. So I think moving to an online diamond open access model is really the way to go. So I'll stop there and happy to entertain questions.
Thank you so much, Anna. And thanks for all the details of this rather recent episode, and that those of us who pay attention to the topic have been following closely. Um, Next up, we have, and as you all know, Johan joined late, so I didn't get help pronouncing his name. So I'll do my best. We have Johan Rorik, who is the executive director of Coalition S, an initiative for open access publishing, and a visiting professor of French linguistics at Leiden University in the Netherlands. He is the co-editor-in-chief of Glossa, a journal of general linguistics, a journal founded by the former editorial team of Lingua, which, and this will sound familiar, resigned in reaction to publisher policies. And as I recall, Lingua was, at least in my fields of the woods, one of the first journals who did this. So we're looking forward to hearing from Johan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Sebastian, for introducing me. I don't think Lingua was the first one to flip, but I mean, let me first introduce myself. I'm a linguist by training. I have been an editor. I mean, I don't dare to say this, for 26 years. I will stop next year because I think one should, there should be rotation and everything. But of course, the journal needed to be set up and a good team needed to be in place, and it had to be running smoothly, which it is now. So I'll do something else. I'll explain about that later. But so first I was at Elsevier for about 15 years, between 99 and 2015. And since I was there when the dinosaurs still were still roaming the earth in 1999, I mean, I've seen this in an entire evolution from publishing with the commercial publishers, which was really initially a kind of gentleman's agreement. I still remember I had a one-page agreement with Elsevier in 1999. And in 2015, I ended with a 26-page contract that basically stipulated that everything that I did was owned completely by Elsevier. So every name I added to the reviewer list, every email I wrote within the system, everything was owned by Elsevier. And I found that extremely constraining. They also meddled with the composition of the editorial board. For instance, one of the most egregious things was that they insisted that I nominated an editor from China simply because there they had a growing market. So they interfered really with the editorial management of the journal in ways that I could not accept. So that's when I started to look for a different solution. Also, in the context of the Elsevier boycotts, reviewers started refusing it. This was 2011, 14 years ago. Reviewers started refusing to review for us. So this made me think, and I was in contact with a number of Diamond Open Access activists, and slowly I built up the capacity to make the switch. So I secured some funding, I talked to my editorial board, and so in 2015 we were ready to take the plunge. We did this very carefully. We talked to Elsevier first. We said, look, these are our demands. And of course, we knew beforehand that they could not meet those demands, but at least, we had tried to have an honest conversation with them. They refused, and we resigned en masse in October 2015. So that's the story. I mean, you can find some of these things online as well. So my so the second point is, yeah, talk about my experience editing journals. So yes, I found this entire system with Elsevier extremely constraining. So it's a slightly different story from what Anna is talking about. Anna was talking about quality control issues, which are really coming to the fore now, and which are really the result of the publishers, commercial publishers, trying to maximize their profit, especially and especially push out the smaller journals. It's very clear that they don't make any red cent on the smaller journals, and that those are the ones they want to push out. So they have made, I mean, what I would call a differential system of service. So the big journals get a lot of service, the smaller journals get minimal service. This is clearly what's happening. I mean, of course, they will say that this is not the case, but you can see it in the facts if you talk to editors. Um, so as you know, I'm a big proponent of a very different system of publishing, which actually puts less power in the hands of commercial publishers. The idea, so this is Diamond Open Access, which was already mentioned by Anna. And the idea of Diamond Open Access, as I've sort of discussed this with a number of people and also theorized about this, I wrote about this in a small paper that I call the 10 Principles of Diamond Open Access. One of the fundamental principles for me is the distinction between content-related elements and service-related elements. So I'm convinced that we should make sure that all content-related elements are in the hands of the scholarly community. That's our collateral, if you like. So that means the journal titles, the reviews, the papers, the names of the reviewers. So all of those things, the things that we build as editors, should be in our hands or should be in the hands of the community, in the hands of the authors. Papers in the hands of the authors via CCBY, names and so on, the titles as well in the hands of a not-for-profit foundation or a university. So these are conditions that we have now built into the basic requirements for Diamond Open Access journals, at least in Europe, in what we are calling now the European Diamond Capacity Hub, which is something that we're building for Diamond Open Access journals in Europe and hopefully beyond, because we are also now expanding to share this experience with relevant publishers in Africa and in Latin America, and to try and learn from each other in a project that we call the Almasi project. In any case, this idea of content-related elements on the one hand and service-related elements on the other is an important one, because that allows us to come to a balanced market. We have the collateral, the papers and the content, and the service, and the publishers can be service providers. They can bid for the services. This is one way of seeing things. It's not that we want the death of the publishers. As Moin already said, these publishers often have a lot of knowledge if they want to, especially the smaller publishers, which I really think deliver a valuable service to the fields that they are active in. I am not so keen on the larger commercial publishers, but smaller publishers really need to be protected, I think, and I think they can be in this system of Diamond Open Access publishing. And so I believe that's where the future lies. I mean, when we have the collateral of the contents, we can put demands. We can also, work, like Anna said, with Open Library of Humanities and their submission system, and we can work collaboratively to set the demands that are, the kind of things that we want for our journals. I mean, all journals are a little bit different. And we can customize solutions. We can set our own policies. We don't have to negotiate elements of open science, for instance, that we would like, because we can set them ourselves as part of the journal policies. We don't have to pay a very expensive commercial publishers or to convince a very expensive commercial publisher to ask for things that we think are normal, to ask for registered reports, to ask for open peer review, to ask for all sorts of things that we think should be part of a 21st century publishing environment. Do tell me, Sebastian, when I speak for too long, because once I get going, I don't stop. In any case, like Anna, I'm with the Open Library of Humanities. I'm very happy with them. I mean, of course, there are things that can be improved. That's always the case. But the nice thing is that you are part of a community where you can discuss these things and not part of a behemoth that just dictates their demands to you. As if they owned the journal. For me, this was always about who really owns the journal? And I am fundamentally convinced that the journal is owned by the scholarly community. And what we showed with the lingua glossa story was that, in fact, this is like buying a new car. You leave the old car behind. We left the old car lingua behind, and the journal still exists, but it's no longer, it's really called a zombie journal. The quality of the papers there is dismal. I mean, they dropped out of the top 20 of Google Scholar H5 index, where we recuperated our original place. And so basically what we did is we bought a new car. As the community bought a new car and drove the new car, Glossa, and since 2016, we've published 1,054 articles. So about 100 a year, between 100 and 120. The community has followed us. We are doing great. So it's basically like Anna, like the story that Anna said. I mean, if she has 150 submissions in 3 months, that's fantastic. I mean, that really shows that we can do this. We can take these journals in our own hands, take them away from the commercial publishers who are not serving us anymore, the way they used to. Because I mean, my experience in 1999 was a good experience, but it's the increasing commercialization of these journals has really been detrimental to the scholarly endeavor, and I think we should change it. Okay, I'll stop here. That's a good way to stop, I think.
Thank you so much. This was great. You have a fan club in the chat, so don't see that so often. So thanks for this, both kind of for the details and for the broader picture. And to conclude our initial statements, we have John Gerstel. John has a little bit of a different background, but I think close enough to some of the others. He is the senior publishing director at the American Political Science Association, where he oversees the publication of APSA's flagship journals, the American Political Science Review, where, for disclosure, I'm an associate editor, Perspective of Politics, and PS Political Science and Politics, all published by Cambridge University Press, and then works with seven additional publishers for the publication of APSA's section journals. He also oversees a small book program published by De Gruyter, and APSA preprints, the first society-owned preprint server in the social sciences and humanities. John, take it away.
Thanks, Sebastian. Thank you to the Center for Open Science for inviting me here and for organizing such an important panel. I'm honored to be here among so many distinguished panelists. As Sebastian said, I'm the publishing director of American Political Science Association. And what he didn't say is that I have no experience as a journal editor whatsoever. I've been at APSA for the last 7 years and oversee the association's journals, book program, preprint server, and member magazine. But prior to that, I also worked at Wiley, Springer, which is now Springer Nature, and Blackwell Publishing, which some of you might remember, and that's now part of Wiley. I did an undergraduate degree in history at Rutgers University, a master's from the University of Leeds, and my first job was actually in patent licensing at MIT. And that's a whole nother area that deals with really similar questions about intellectual property, business partnerships, and government funding, all the things that we face as publishers every day. So my first job at Blackwell, I actually worked on philosophy and public affairs as an entry-level coordinator. And Blackwell then was a family-owned, UK-based publisher, and it was well known for being extremely flexible and accommodating to its editors, to its society partners, and even earned the title of an honorary not-for-profit publisher. By the end of my time there, I was managing over 25 journals in business and economics, and the company was shortly acquired by Wiley. At that point, I left to go to Springer in 2008 and started as a book editor. So my editorial experience was on the book side. And in books, the editor is someone who's employed by the publisher, whereas for journals, the editor, as you've heard from my co-panelists, are usually employed at a university and then contracted by a publisher or by an association to edit the publications for a certain term. As a book editor for economics, political science, and statistics, I was constantly soliciting and peer reviewing proposals and publishing new titles. So I bring a very different experience, both books and journals, publisher, and society. At APSA, our main publishing partner, as Sebastian mentioned, is Cambridge University Press, but we work with 8 publishers total because we have several organized section journals. These are like the interest groups within our association that have legacy publishing agreements with different presses and have sort of different states of ownership. So I see the different technology, different management styles, different innovations that are brought by each publisher from the smallest university presses to the largest commercial publishers. We currently publish several pure open access journals, including one Diamond OA journal. And even APSA's flagship journals are mostly open access at this point due to the Cambridge transformative or read and publish agreements. I was asked to talk about editorial models, so I can speak to the different types that I've seen from my years working at the publisher and the association, and some of these were already touched on a little bit today. So here at APSA, our editors are selected by our governing body, the APSA Council, and they usually serve a 4-year term and are generally given the option for a 2-year renewal. This is really important because it brings a level of diversity and a broad intellectual scope to each of the journals, which are not under any one speciality or methodology for a long term. As the journal submissions have grown, we've received applications by larger and larger teams of editors. I think Sebastian, yours now is the largest, 16 editors, including people with specialties like Sebastian, with data and ethics and transparency, and a social media editor and all that. So also having these large teams additionally brings in many different perspectives and approaches. The second model I've seen is for when a journal is owned by the publisher, not by the society partner, and the publisher is responsible for selecting the editor or editors. Publish-owned journals sometimes are not as long established or don't have as high of impact factor. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they receive very few submissions, sometimes a lot. Generally, the publishers might contract with one editor and some associate editors to do this job. But as I think others here have alluded to, the publisher's concerns are very different than that of a society. They may be less concerned with the breadth of scope or representing all parts of the community, and might be more likely to hire someone who can serve the long term, who doesn't have other commitments, or, importantly, work within the allocated budget. The publisher-owned titles for the publisher are generally more profitable than society journals, where there's another party that's also receiving a financial return. The third approach, and it's maybe less common in humanities and social sciences, but it's something that we've done at APSA at least until the 2010s, and that's having a in-house editor-in-chief. So a single person employed by a publisher or a society whose full-time job is to edit a journal. So we had this for political science, PS Political Science and Politics for many years, until it moved to the model that I discussed previously with the 4-year term. Increasingly, the in-house editor has become more common in the sciences, and it's employed by publishers like Nature or Wiley, who hire PhDs as full-time editorial staff. And finally, the fourth type editor, which Anna also alluded to, is kind of the long-term founding editor. And maybe this is an offshoot of type 2, because the ownership of the journal could be vested in the editor, who's been around for many decades, or it could be in the publisher who launched the journal with the editor. And there you have someone who's extremely dedicated to the journal in a way that I think the publishers and societies and other editors might not understand, and has a very different relationship with the publisher and with the content than someone who's just a contractor or an employee or someone serving, a comparably short term. And it's important, I think, for the publisher or the society to recognize that contribution. And then the editor might be asked to innovate or be more transparent or open the journal to a wide range of approaches or opinions. So it's really important to be sensitive to that individual and their role in establishing the journal. I've acquired journals that have been still run by their founding editor, which may have started self-published, and recognize it's a tremendous amount of work, especially in the digital age. There's sort of a myth that digital publishing has made everything easier and cheaper. And it talked about this already. In many ways, it's also become really more costly and complex. And the types of things that you find yourself doing as an editor these days is very different. So we acquired a journal recently from a founding editor and found, this person wasn't just doing the peer review, but overseeing all aspects of production and copy editing, DOI registration, domain name registration, and everything themselves. So a lot of where publishers add value. In the old days, it was just selling subscriptions and doing the printing and the mailing, but now it's really in the digital workflow, which is challenging, even if you're an experienced technology person. And self-publishing is not without cost, and even open source platforms, as Anna mentioned, still have cost and workload associated with them. An advantage to working with a large publisher is that they have whole teams devoted to these tasks. I think that was alluded to as well, and hopefully can do those things more efficiently. However, you lose a lot of that control, and then you're often at the mercy of yet another third party, and that's the peer review system, which was discussed, the platform service provider, or more likely the full service production vendor in India that your publisher uses. So I was asked to comment on the editor-publisher, and I'm going to add society relationships. And I think they're really just that, they're relationships. And of course, the key to any relationship is trust, communication, and transparency. So I'm going to stop there, and we can get into the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. All right, so I have some question, but the first thing that I'm curious about is if there are comments or questions that any of you for Moin, Anna, Johan, and John have for or to each other. It is a panel discussion after all.
All right, yeah, I have a question. I think it's mainly for Anna and Johan, probably. And I think it's related to Don Moore's question in the Q&A and what I think is on a lot of people's minds. The issue at least in psychology and certainly in many other fields, we attribute status and prestige to particular publishing outlets, usually on the basis of authority, tradition, and impact factor, which, side note, is meaningless. We can talk more about that for those who don't know. So a concern when you're trying to abandon kind of the traditional publishing model and create a new journal on your own platform that's not a recognizable name is that people won't recognize it as legitimate or as prestigious. So there won't be as much value in publishing in that outlet. And so people might send work there, but it's not the highest quality work. But it sounds like the two of you are getting a lot of submissions and getting a lot of great work. So I think it'd be useful for everybody if you could talk a little bit about if you've experienced that kind of tension, if there's any strategies you've been able to use to help ensure that sort of your scientific or publishing community kind of came along with you. To see that outlet as a valuable place for their work.
I mean, we worried a lot about this. This was the one thing that was kind of like the reason we didn't leave in 2019 and stayed around for like 4 more years was this. So I would say a couple things. I have not seen a diminution in the quality of our submissions. In fact, actually, I think because Free and Equal is new and fewer people have discovered us, we have fewer junk kind of papers submitted to us that are just like obviously not going to get published, anywhere. But and I would say at Philosophy and Public Affairs, like a lot of our best papers were by very junior scholars. So they were submitting their dissertation work or early career work to us, and often it was the best papers we got. So we were seriously worried about that. We have still gotten work from quite a bit from junior scholars. In fact, the paper that is next appearing on our website is a terrific paper by a junior scholar. We will, though, one of the things we decided to do, and that I hope to announce very shortly, is to have a prize for work by early career scholars, first 10 years post PhD, to try to incentivize people who might be on the fence to submit to us. So that certainly was one of the things we did. I mean, the other thing is I did a lot of personal outreach. As I said, I'm in a small field, and that helped me. Because there were really only 3 journals. 2 of them were owned by Wiley. And so we felt like if we moved those 2 to open, that would move the community. Like we had that kind of influence. And so that, that's not going to be true of every other field. But, I sent hundreds of personal emails to important senior scholars. And the first paper we published was, a paper that came out of a very prestigious lecture series, a named lecture series at Princeton, that one of the senior scholars was willing to give us. So, that mattered. I think that senior scholars were willing to commit to us and to tell their students that to submit to us. That made a big difference. And we did a lot of personal outreach to try to make that happen.
Yeah, I can add from my experience, what really helped us actually was the visibility of the case. I mean, never knew why this was picked up so widely, but the visibility of the case, the use of social media. I mean, at that time, Facebook was sort of a venue where you could see a lot of linguists. And so I activated the community. A number of people also activated others. And so this was the buzz of linguistics in 2015, 2017, so to speak. So there was really a boycott of the old journal, Lingua. I mean, everybody rallied around this. We really kept it up on social media. And that really helps. What also helps, I think, and I mean, that may not sound very modest of me, but what helps is also your authority as an editor. If you've been doing this for a long time, people know you, people trust you, you have the trust of the community, and that helps a lot. People will say, well, if this person does that, if this team does that, they must be serious. They must have thought about it. We know them from previous experience as an editor, as an author. We will follow them because we know they're good. That's the thing. You get more credit than you think. I was myself extremely amazed that it worked. I mean, and that there was this whole community rallying behind us as an editorial team. I didn't expect that. I really had thought, I'm going to have to go through the desert for years, but no. It is true that you lose your impact factor, but in fact, at least in our fields, social sciences and humanities, impact factors don't count for much. The problem that we saw is that for about 5 years before you get an impact factor, for about 5 years we got a lot of quality content. I mean the same as before, and it is when we got an impact factor that we got all the shitty papers. So now I spend my days desk rejecting papers that I never want to see. I mean, I won't name the countries they come from, but you know what I mean, right? But I do. I mean, since a few years, I mean, I think I've done 400 desk rejects. I mean, I have one at least every day, and this is simply because we have an impact factor. So please deliver us from the impact factor.
That might be the best case against the impact factor I've ever
Yeah,
heard,
please,
actually.
please,
That's really
please. I
good.
mean, deliver us from Clarivate already. You know, so you really don't. I mean, you don't want an impact factor because it gives you more work in desk rejecting those papers. So yes, I think you mobilize your community. That really helps. And yeah, I mean, it probably helps also that it's a relatively small community. Like Anna says, our community is also not huge, right? I mean, I think we have a couple of thousand authors, maybe 3,000 authors, something like that. A community of readers of maybe 10,000, 10 to 15,000. It's relatively small. I mean, we're not talking things like mathematics or life sciences, where we're talking hundreds of thousands of potential authors and reviewers. So I'm not saying it would work there, although the eLife experience, of course, has shown that it can work if you put in enough money into it. But it's really a matter of promoting it. You really have to put in the work of promoting it going forward. But I mean, I would disagree, but yeah, John, it's not hard. I mean, I don't find it hard. If you're well supported, like we are, I think, at the Open Library of Humanities, it's not hard. Of course, it's a lot of clicking, it's a lot of little things. But with a good submission system and a hosting system, a lot is possible. I mean, I'm also production editor in the sense that I look at the last versions of all the articles before I publish them. I do this myself. We publish about 3 articles a week. I mean, of course it's time, but I sort of like it. I mean, it has a kind of an artisanal aspect to it that I've come to like. I mean, I don't chisel the DOIs by hand. Of course, we are, connected to Crossref and all of that. But the advantage of a good submission system is that things can go very, very fast. And that's my experience. I mean, I have a full-time job at Coalition S and with other things that I do. So it's not like I spend, 3 days a week on Gloss. I mean, I spend some time, maybe, between a half a day and a full day every week. But it's a lot of little things that you can do in between, in a submission system. I mean, it's a lot of very small actions, like 30-second actions that you do, for instance, when you're in a boring meeting, and so on. I mean, you have to be a multitasker and you have to be very disciplined, but it's really feasible. So.
Right. Thanks so much. Let me, and you can always chime in again from the panel, but let me start with some of the questions we have in the chat. We have one from Didier Tony that's kind of very process oriented and quite interesting about the nitty-gritty of journal transfers or escapes or whatever you want to call it. So what happened with the manuscripts that were in the pipeline in philosophy and public affairs and presumably also in lingua? Did you transfer them to the new journal? Did you ask authors to withdraw them? What happened? And also, I think that specifically for Anna, did your sisters, I know, did political philosophy do this kind of have the same call for boycotts, and did they have similar effects?
Um, so actually that's a big issue. So I had a contract with Wiley that included a non-compete clause. This caused me a lot of pain. So I had to actually retain lawyers to help negotiate a termination agreement that would get me out of that. So that meant that no, I absolutely could not encourage any authors to withdraw their papers and submit them to some new journal because that would bring me into legal jeopardy and I could have been sued. So what we did at Philosophy and Public Affairs was to declare that any paper that had already received an R&R and that had been resubmitted in response to comments from our team was one that we were going to see through to the end. But any paper that had not yet been resubmitted when we declared our resignation, that was going to be kind of left, to Wiley's new editorial team if they could get one. Or the author could withdraw it, but we didn't issue any kind of statement encouraging authors to withdraw it. So we had about 10 articles that we worked on over the summer post resignation to kind of finalize that work, the ones that were far along in our process. And then, Wiley was able to find a new editor of Philosophy and Public Affairs. There is a new editor there. There was no boycott declared. Again, that was not something we could do. We couldn't call for that given our legal constraints. We would have been sued. So they do have a new editor, and the journal will function on their terms now, I think. And we did see a lot of authors withdraw their articles voluntarily and bring them over to Free and Equal. But we had to leave it to each author's decision, and we couldn't influence that decision anyway.
Yeah. In the Lingua Glossa case, I mean, I can't reveal everything I did way back when because some of it was probably not in line with my then contract. I still had a contract with Elsevier until the end of 2015. What happened is that I put in charge a number of people for the new, a couple of people for the new journal, who then, convinced authors and in the community to withdraw their papers from the old Lingua, because I couldn't do that. I was legally obliged to have my services for Lingua until the end of December 2015. I still remember drawing a huge breath at midnight on the 31st of December 2015. But yes, I mean, authors withdrew. We gave them, of course, I mean, if authors wanted to continue to publish in Lingua for all the reasons we mentioned, prestige and so on, we let them do that. We just said, look, but you know, but of course they were some of them were approached and some of them withdrew themselves. So we had some articles to start with. So yes, that was an interesting experience, but you have to be prepared for the legal matters. So because I mean, of course, you have a contract with the publisher. So if you switch, you can't just say, "Well, my contract is null and void," until your contract. You have to serve the term of your contract. And so you have to be fair to the old publisher as well. That I think is important. At the same time, nothing prevents you from organizing the community to convince people to convince people to leave the old journal behind, and that is what happened in our case. So yes, I mean this issue Didier mentions is a real one that you have to be prepared for and think carefully of how you do that.
Great. Anyone else? I have a question from Nate Bresnow. Hi, Nate. So Nate is asking, is there some kind of concise information packet that I could take to my communities to show them the problem and then more importantly, how the solution is possible, like a PowerPoint or report to take back their journals? But I'd like to broaden his question a little bit because I'm a little bit skeptical that in all cases, taking over journals is the right answer. So maybe also, and I'd be interested to hear from any of you on this, when is it a good idea? Like when should you and when maybe shouldn't you think about um, going solo with a journal?
I actually don't have too much to say about this, but just want to make one point of clarification. I guess it depends on what we mean by, or what Nate means by take back their journals. Um, if it's try to take ownership over an existing journal, as John described, that could be anywhere from complicated to impossible, depending on the ownership model of it, because sometimes societies own it, sometimes publishers own it, sometimes it's joint ownership. And there's buyouts that have to happen, like Anna was talking about. Um, so there's that issue versus sort of abandoning a journal and creating a new one in the same image, I guess. So those are two separate issues, I would just say.
I just put in the chat an editorial that was written by a member of my journal's team over the summer when I was still negotiating my non-compete that sort of lays out our case. I think it's really nicely written. And I'm happy to, if there are people who want to talk to me, or Johan probably has a lot more knowledge and experience in this domain. But the one thing maybe I would say is that if you do this, super important to create a corporate entity that we are a nonprofit corporation now that owns the journal. So you need to create a corporate structure that ensures that the journal cannot be acquired, by a for-profit publisher and will, remain in the ownership and management of the academic staff and editorial staff of the journal.
Great. And then Johan put a link to a website that I take it is designed, declaring independence, that is designed specifically as a concise information packet in the vein of what Nate was asking about in both the chat and the Q&A.
Yes, I would like to say that this is really something where we need more organization. We need to organize ourselves. That's why I'm involved in these initiatives like European Diamond, the European Diamond Hub, and others. Also national initiatives for diamond open access that are now springing forth in Europe, in Germany, and the Nordic countries. We really need to organize ourselves. I mean, we can do this. I mean, technically, technically everything is there to help us edit a journal. It's just that we need a little bit of organization to help each other moving this forward. I mean, I remember talking to Anna. This was what, a year and a half ago, Anna, something like that. We need to do this more. I mean, it's a service to the field and to scholarship.
Great. I'm going to go to some of the questions that are marked as answered in the chat, but I think they warrant some more conversation here. And first one I want to go to is Timothy Elfenbein's question. Timothy, for those of you who don't know him, has been active in kind of the open publishing for kind of smaller humanities stuff and has like a long history in the industry. Worked as a managing editor for cultural anthropology, etc. And he says, I've been quite frustrated with many of the recent journal declarations of independence, mass resignations, establishment of new titles that haven't been more transparent about what seems to me the basis of the conflict with the publishers, ownership and government structures. He thinks the Glossa case was an exception in that they did much better. How can we push the discussion beyond shock at the breaking of the gentleman's agreement over editorial control towards the underlying issues of how groups of scholars organize and govern themselves, in this case, through journals? And right, I think part of what might be behind Timothy's question, and that might also be my own slant, is that not all was well in the old world, right? We had journals that were governed by the same, typically men, for 40 years who exerted enormous power, not always necessarily for universal academic or public benefit. So we need to be, with all due criticism about changes and corporatization, we also need to be careful not to glamorize an old model that had its own very problematic components. But I would like to hear a little bit more about kind of how we can communicate in the case something goes wrong in the relationship between editors and publishers and potentially societies.
Maybe I can say a little bit about this. So for one thing, I'm one of the journals that did not lay out, our statement did not lay out our detailed grievances in the way I just did here today. The reason for that is because at the time we were very afraid of a lawsuit, and we didn't want to press a public case against Wiley because, as I said, I had a non-compete agreement and I was quite scared that they were going to file suit against me. In terms of the old regime, I mean, I'm very sympathetic to some of these comments. I'm a female editor. I'm that didn't used to be the case at the journal I was working for. It was, there's a long chain of men before me. I guess I would say, though, that I don't think that the answer to these legitimate concerns is to place more power in the hands of for-profit publishers to press journals to accede to their demands. I mean, in this case, I think there is a legitimate debate about how many articles journals should publish per year and so on, and different journals can take different approaches to that. I do see my kind of mission as sort of balancing a service to my author pool, which is to provide quality comments that make their work as good as we can make it, and to showcase good work in a high-profile outlet. And my reader pool, right? My reader pool wants to read like high quality curated articles that I've put together as articles that I think are really important for anybody in this field to be keeping track of, right? And so to some degree, I'm trying to balance these two demands. Now, maybe I'm not balancing them in the only or the best way. And there might be other journals that make legitimate judgment calls about how to balance these things that are different than mine. And I would encourage a proliferation of journals with different approaches to this. But But I don't think any of those journals should be controlled by the for-profit publishers' economic agenda.
Agreed. Very much. Well said. I think this might be a good moment for me to say a little bit about the peer community in model, or the PCI model. I'm going to put a link to it here if you're not familiar with peer community. But regarding the broader question of kind of an antiquated model, there are serious questions that we should be asking ourselves whether a journal-centric approach to publishing and dissemination is really the way we want to go. And especially with publishers having so much control versus models that put authors in greater control and us as researchers and scholars in greater control of how our communities operate. So the PCI model is about just that, trying to move the entire system of evaluation away from journals. So it's a journal independent preprint review service. So it is not a journal. There's different peer communities. So that's, I said, we're developing one in psychology right now. They're sort of well-defined or reasonably well-defined communities that have their own standards and their own practices and whatnot. And preprints are submitted to the service, the platform. And from there, it all looks very similar to the traditional journal publishing process. You have a recommender, which is like an associate editor. You have reviewers and so on. But the ultimate endpoint isn't that it's published, is that it's recommended. It's a recommended preprint. And then the authors can decide what they want to do with it at that point. If they want to, we have some participating journals who say anything that's recommended, they will publish. And so the author can determine actually which, maybe there's 10 journals that they could publish in. They can choose which one they want to send it to. Or they can choose to just leave it be as a recommended preprint. Or Peer Community has its own journal called Peer Community Journal, that any peer PCI that recommends an article, it can automatically be published Diamond Open Access in the Peer Community Journal. Or you can try to just submit it to another journal and say, hey, I have this recommendation with these reviews. What do you think? Will you take this? So it just gives the authors more control over the entire process and directs what they want to do and what they want the final product to be. And it's one of the things it's meant to alleviate is this idea of like shopping around articles, which is very common in psychology research. I don't know how much that happens in different disciplines. I assume it happens a lot. It gets rejected in one place, you have to submit it and start all over at a new journal, and then if it gets rejected, start all over at a new journal. Again, the transfer networks, the idea behind those is to eliminate that, except it's a publisher motivated way of eliminating it. This is an author focused way of eliminating that process. So it reduces reviewer time, author time, editor time, and is more author focused. So it really has a lot of benefits.
And it is in the hands of the scholarly community.
Yes, importantly.
Yeah.
And they're very transparent about costs and operations and everything like that.
Yeah.
There are two questions, one by Evgeny and one by let me get the name right, by Cardelin about retractions, and then another, the one by Evgeny is about allegations of misconduct. And so I guess I would like to hear a little bit about, and that comes in part from my interest in publishing ethics, who looks at these things and what roles different bodies play. And that's, of course, particularly relevant for journals if the allegation is misconduct not against an author, but misconduct by one of the editors, right? If you run your own journal, who is responsible for checking on this? If you run for a commercial publisher, if you run a journal for commercial publishers, what role does the publisher play? How well will it work? And then I guess John can maybe also talk a little bit about, because he gets complaints with if we mess up at APSR, kind of what roles can scholarly societies play in this. Johan, you want to start? And then maybe John?
Yes, I think again, I mean, these things are not extremely complicated. You have to, I mean, once these are things also that I discovered when when starting the journal, right, that suddenly you're on your own and you have to develop policies for these eventualities. So you have to develop a policy, for instance, also for the governance of the journal. How do positions rotate? How do editors rotate? Are there rules for these kinds of things? Policies of misconduct. I sometimes formulated at the publisher level. I think that's the case with the Open Library of Humanities. I didn't check, but I think there are policies provided for that purpose. But basically, you have to make sure that you have a self-cleaning system in your governance model, right? In our case, for instance, if that were to be the case, if one of the editorial board members would misbehave, we would probably decide in the editorial team to reject that paper or to eject the member for misconduct. We have that kind of power. I mean, we do initiate, the renewal of the editorial board. So these are things that we have given ourselves as tasks. But indeed, these are things that you do have to think about. I mean, even if you do not have necessarily, written out policies for every single use case, I do think you sort of need to think about such eventualities. Uh, but don't think that the publisher actually, or commercial publisher, will help you. Commercial publishers are extremely reluctant to do retractions, as we know, even in cases where it's absolutely clear that there is an ethical misconduct. I mean, Elsevier is a case in point. I mean, you see about every week you see a paper that has that problem.
Don, did you want to add to that?
Sure. So Evgeny's question, this is really specific because you're saying, okay, there's someone submits a manuscript alleging that an editorial board member of that journal has published articles with manipulation. If it's outside there's COPE guidelines for a lot of things, but there's always weird cases like this where it doesn't quite fit into the flowcharts that COPE provides all of us, that all journals, whether they're self-published, whether it's social sciences or natural sciences or whatever, should be following. In the case of the editorial board, if they've published this in your journal, then that definitely warrants an investigation. And if an editorial board member has done things, they might be asked just not to remain on the board. The other question of Cardilin I thought was really interesting, and it was, do you think that access status, gold, green, free access, has an impact on time interval between publication and retraction? So, the COPE guidelines that I mentioned are what we follow, and it won't really impact the time to do the investigation, regardless of what format your journal is in. If it's an open access journal or if it's a subscription journal, the editors should be following the exact same process once they get the complaint. Now, Johan pointed out that maybe there'd be fewer retractions in Diamond art journals because there's no incentive to maximize volume. Certainly open access articles can make their way around the world faster, and with open data, people can easily do replication and find mistakes. So there might be a slight time element there, but the actual impact of the interval between publication and retraction, as far as doing an investigation, editors should treat it the exact same, no matter what type of journal they're working on.
Yeah, I think editors might treat it the same, but publishers not necessarily, right? So especially this goes back to a point that I made about just how large and complex a lot of the commercial publishers are with multiple people working on similar topics. So you sort of raise the issue. The editors hopefully are often the first one to hear about the potential need for retraction, and they go to their managing editor, whoever the person is that their point of contact, and then it kind of has to work its way through the different bowels of bureaucracy, that exist within a lot of the commercial publishers. And I've actually never processed a retraction before, but many corrections, and the corrections were just as difficult in terms of not hearing back, and you have to wait and hear back from this committee or this team, and this team has to review it. And so that's a lot and the issues just kind of get lost in there sometimes. And you really, as an editor, you have to stay on top of it. But a lot of editors aren't willing to do that. or are busy to, you know, whatever. Sometimes not willing and sometimes just preoccupied.
I should say the Cambridge publishing ethics team has been really helpful in cases where we've had some of these questionable situations or where we do need to process a correction in terms of getting guidance. They do have a wonderful team there headed up by Jennifer Wright that's really helpful. I'm not sure that's the case with the other publishers.
Thanks for all this. I'm just trying to see if there's open questions. Yeah, I think it's worthwhile talking a little bit about sources of support for Diamond Open access. Carrie asks about the role of libraries, which surely have a role to play here. But if those of you with opinions and or experience on this want to talk about kind of how you fund other than, you know, fundraising is hard, that would be, I think, super interesting.
Yeah,
And if
that's
you're willing to say something about the orders of magnitude without going into, you know, the financial statements of your organization, I think that would also be helpful for people to hear. How much does it
the order
actually
of
cost to
magnitude
run?
of cost.
Yes, to run a Diamond Open Access journal.
Yeah, may I? Or Anna, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead and start. Johan.
Okay, well, your costs, I mean, I think, I mean, somebody asked me that question at University of Chicago, so I have that more or less freshly in mind. Your costs really depend on the number of articles you're handling because your main costs go into copy editing and typesetting, which is not always provided by the Diamond publisher. For instance, at eScholarship, this is not provided, and this is something eScholarship, which publishes Glossa Psycholinguistics, which is a sister journal of ours. And these costs have to be met by donations, for instance, from university libraries. We have some, and also by what we call voluntary author contributions. So basically, this is a kind of Robin Hood system where the richer authors contribute a voluntary author contribution of $500, and that pays for about the copy editing and typesetting costs of 2 articles, if you like. So basically, is the rich authors with grant funding who pay for the less rich authors. It's a system. It's not ideal. I mean, I will admit this. It's not ideal. In the ideal case, indeed, libraries pay for this, and libraries convert the costs that they pay for APCs and for subscriptions. They convert those costs to Diamond Open Access. That's something that some universities are working on. There's, for instance, a very interesting model for this at Université de Lorraine, and also MIT libraries have done this. So this is really something that librarians should look into, you know, reduce their costs with transformative agreements, rely on interlibrary loan instead, and use the money that is freed up by saving these on these costs and invest those in Diamond Open Access. I mean, there is money in the system, but you know it has to be rechanneled towards the right priorities. That is, I think, what should happen. Now, of course, this is not something that can be done at the grassroots level by a single journal editor. This really needs to be organized. That's why I insist so much on organization for these things. You know, we have to stick together, make sure that various journals want to do this, put pressure on libraries, you know, show best practices, and convert the system to a better one. And this is also what I'm trying to do in the European Diamond Capacity Hub and Coalition S actually as well.
If I could just add a couple of notes to that. So the Open Library of Humanities, if there's anyone in the audience thinking about converting a journal or starting a new journal, that is an organization that provides a lot of infrastructure to cover costs, and it has a network of library supporters kind of already in place that contribute to the Open Library. So that's Johan and I are both with them. we also, as I mentioned, we have an additional set of costs. So we are a triple anonymous journal. So I rely on a managing editor to handle all kinds of author-facing information, and then we also pay for copy editors. Uh, and we've found actually libraries to be pretty supportive. So we just, Harvard Library System has instituted a new program to provide startup funding to open access online journals. We just received some grant funding from them. They also work with there's a consortium of libraries in the United States called the Ivy Plus Consortium of Libraries. And Harvard is giving us an introduction to that meeting to kind of hopefully negotiate in a more centralized manner with like many libraries at once, which would be helpful. So I think that, the librarians are onto this. They're kind of, pretty pissed off about the amount of the budgets that they're sending over to commercial publishers right now, and they want to do something about it. So my impression is, I mean, just from having talked to people recently in this area, is that librarians want to work with you on this. And if you can provide kind of reasonable proposals, that you will find a receptive audience there.
Yeah, 100% agree. I found in my experience, librarians have been the fiercest advocates for open access and open access publishing. The Big Ten Academic Alliance, which is an alliance of more than 10 actually universities in the U.S. Midwest. I'm not sure how many schools are part of it now, like 16 or something. But years ago, they had a letter, a position letter saying they no longer would subscribe to any more nature related titles because nature's just been proliferating titles. And it's clearly just a money grab. And so we don't, as of like 5 or 6 years ago, maybe even longer, we don't subscribe to any more of those. And so they are taking stands like that. They are very supportive of open access publishing. Our library at Minnesota is a contributor and supporter of SciArchive, the preprint server in psychology. So I would just say at your institution, if you're not in touch with your librarians, you should be. And it's very likely that they will not only be supportive, but will have a number of resources that can help you out.
Certainly in the US, most libraries will have an open access or open scholarship librarian with specific expertise around this. All right, we are at exactly, and I think it's kind of nice to end on the librarians. So we are at exactly 1/2 past the hour. Thank you so much to Moin, Anna, Johan, and John for all your experience, insights, and engaging with complex questions. Thank you to everyone who stayed with us for all 90 minutes and everyone listening to the recording. And Johan, you want the last
Yes,
word?
one last thing. I mean, do contact me if you want to know more about the costs of a journal. I just copied that thing, so just drop me a line.
All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your Thursday.
Thanks, Sebastian, for organizing and moderating
Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
inviting. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed it.